Okay. Science time. Let's title this, please. Speciation and Extinction. Speciation and extinction. Speciation is a noun based on a verb. What verb would speciation be based on, probably? Speciating, or to speciate. Yeah, and what noun is that based on? Species. Yeah, so if I was going to, trying to think of another, what's another verb that ends in ate? Yeah, another verb. Calculate. Good, yeah. So a calculation, excellent example, Kesslin. A calculation is a noun. It's a calculation item. It's a noun based on the verb to calculate, which is based on the noun, calculator maybe. But what noun is this? What is at the core of this? This is related to species. So this effectively means to do what? So everyone should have defined this. What does this mean?
Can I define it?
Fate, let's hear what you say. Shh, let's listen to Fate. I'm going to repeat it for the microphone, but Fate, I want to hear what you say.
The formation of new species as a result of evolution.
Yep, the formation of new species. We'll say to make a new species. Fate specifies as a result of evolution. We could even say just as a result of adaptation. Remember, evolution is all the changes that take place in a population in its genetic traits. But we could even use a simpler word, adaptation, to describe that. As they adapt to their environment, a new species could appear. What does the new species start out as? It was a rock and it turns into a lizard? No, what does it start out as, probably? The speciation occurs from a what? Yeah, way back in time it was a single cell. But if we have, for example, yeah, I'm looking for the ancestor. But look at the lemurs on page 117. You don't have page 117. The lemurs on page Exploration 1. Do you have lemurs somewhere? Look at this. Can anyone see this picture of lemurs on theirs?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I want you to look at this picture of lemurs. Okay, look at the picture of lemurs. I have in my text, and you should have on your explorations, 3 different kinds of lemurs. This should be in Exploration 1. Does anyone have 3 different kinds of lemurs? Yeah, there. Okay, so there's a map of Madagascar, and as you hover over the map of Madagascar, 3 different kinds of lemurs will come up. What are some things that are similar about these 3 different kinds of lemurs? Shh. Why is there so much talking at the table? Please be silent. So we have these things looking like this is going to be a nice ratchet-looking lemur. It's got his little toes. Ooh, I made him kind of scary there at the end.
He looks like the thing on the table.
Good. Okay, so there's one kind of lemur. And here's another kind of lemur. And here's a third kind of lemur. Oh yeah, I got my gorilla here. These represent. I'm just going to use these squiggly lines to represent lemurs. Pretend they have all the characteristics of lemur. They've got tails and little legs. These are good lemurs. They have beady little eyes. There. This is a great picture of lemurs. What is similar about these lemurs? Some of them are single-celled. Some of them have flagellum. Some of them have venom sacs. No, all those things are not true. Those are things some organisms have. But do these lemurs have that? No. They all have 4 limbs, right? They're all tetrapods, like we talked about when we had the video. Okay, is that important? Do all organisms have 4 limbs? No. Do oak trees have 4 limbs? No. So obviously, the fact that they all have 4 limbs means, to some extent, they are closely related, right? They have a common ancestor. But guess what? A tiger and an eagle also have 4 limbs. So that doesn't mean they're necessarily closely related. What kind of traits do they have that mean they are closely related? They share what's the label here? Common ancestor. Let's write that down. What are the things that mean they probably share a common ancestor? What are some traits? Yes, but that would be lots of things have 4 limbs. What are some things about just these specific lemurs that tell us that they probably have 4 limbs? Right, their body structure, which I've done a great job representing here, their body structure is similar. What else? What are some other? Beady little eyes. B little i's. That's another one. Gabe?
DNA.
Okay, that would not be a physical trait. They do have the same, they probably have almost entirely the same genotype. Their genes probably all say the same thing, but we're looking for what phenotype, what are the physical characteristics they have because of their genes that tell us they're the same. Hunter?
Don't lemurs have like striped tail?
Yeah, one of these, the ring-tailed lemur, has a striped tail. But guess what? We're actually going to use that as an example of how they're different. Because do they all have striped tails? No, they all have kind of the same shape of tail, a bushy old tail. But this one has a striped tail. And that's what I was going to talk about next, is that there must have been here some kind of speciation event. Meaning that something, some external factor, caused this common ancestor to diverge. The verb we use, divergence. To diverge, to become multiple separate critters. The names of these, if you want to look them up sometime, are common brown lemur. This is a very good drawing of that. Common brown lemur. Red-tailed lemur. Does it say red-bellied?
Yeah, red-bellied.
Oh yeah, red-bellied lemur, sorry. Please stop talking. Thank you. Common brown lemur, the red-bellied lemur, and the ring-tailed lemur. It's obvious to us that these things are more closely related than, for instance, even these lemurs in another primate like the gorilla. Right? They have a lot of the same traits. They're all mammals. They all even have the same beady little eyes because they're very closely related. But these things are more closely related to each other than to this, and the evidence for that is in their phenotype, in the way they look and behave, and their traits, their phenotype. Yes?
Are they a monkey?
Yeah, they're a primate. I don't know how I'd call them a monkey, but they're in the great primates like the gorilla, and like the apes, and like the monkeys, and like human beings. Yes, Will?
What's the monkey's name?
This, we're not going to talk about that right now. Okay, but so what we are going to talk about, though, are what kind of things, what can be a speciation event? What can happen to cause a speciation event? Well, what must not be able to happen? These would all be the same thing if they were able to still do what? What causes things to be able to be the same species? What's the definition of species? Well, let's go back to that first. What's the definition of species? Yeah, that's the main thing. We have what we call the biological, let's write this, biological definition of species. This is better than the old one, which we called the morphological definition of species, which is where if they look the same, they're the same species. And that didn't cut it, because especially on things like insects and plants, to us they look exactly the same, but they can't do what, Kesslin? Reproduce. They must be able to, members of a species must be able to reproduce together. Does this work for all organisms? Give me an example of an organism that this definition of species wouldn't work for. No? Well, okay, some plants are, I forget if it's dioecious or monoecious, but one of them is able to just reproduce with its own genetic material. What else, though? No, spiders do fit this definition. What, Gabe? Eventually. All dogs are the same species. Canis lupus familiaris. They're all the same species. That's not a good example. Will? There's different breeds.
Dog and cat trying to breed.
Okay, but that would be, you're all giving me examples of things that do work. Heisel's pretty close, but I was thinking of things that are single cells, and single cells undergo asexual reproduction. This doesn't work because they don't reproduce together anyway.
A spider plant?
Oh, a spider plant, is that what you're saying? A spider plant you could take cuttings off of, which, yeah, that would be asexual. So things that reproduce asexually don't fit into this. And in fact, there's a better one. What would be a better definition of species even than this? That we wouldn't be able to see as easily, but that would work better. What's actually defining the species? It's what's?
DNA.
Yeah, it's DNA. It's genes. So there's a genetic definition of species too, which is even better. But this one works. This is kind of like the rule of thumb. If they can breed together and produce viable offspring, then they are the same species. A key part of that is viable offspring, because like, a horse and a donkey can breed to make a mule, but the mule itself is sterile. The mule cannot produce offspring, and so that's not viable offspring. It can live, but it won't produce. Yes?
What about like if a mule here and a white tail here cross?
Do they?
Yeah. I don't know.
There are such things as, that was the other thing I was going to say, is there are interspecific hybrids, especially among things like plants, where two plant species can interbreed. And so that's the other non-example. That's one of the reasons why this is not always adequate. So usually this works well. It works better than the morphological definition, which is where if they look the same, they are the same. This one works better than that, but it's not as good as the genetic definition. So this tells us that what event must cause a speciation? Before I get to that, Hunter, what was your question?
I was just going to ask if you like the event that...
Oh no.
Nice.
I gave him a haircut. Yes, sorry, Hunter.
Like, you know, they've made some new species with when a lion and a tiger like reproduce and they make a new one. And then also like mules, I was going to ask, why don't mules have babies? Like, why can't
I think, no. Okay, so you're talking about some interspecific hybrids, like for instance, a tiger and a lion, and depending on whether the female is one and the male is the other, I don't remember which is which, but a liger is one kind of crossbreed between them, and a tyon is the other. But I wish you would stop talking. But as far as I know, those things are also not viable because they can't themselves breed. The tiger or the lion, or those are just real words. Tiger and lion are real words. The liger and the tyon can't themselves breed. It's the same thing with your mule, which is a crossbreed between a donkey and a horse. No, they're not all male. They just can't breed. They're genetically don't have genetics. Yeah, there actually was one example of a mule that could breed in where I did my student teaching. There was one that has ever been able to have genetic offspring. But yeah, it did, and that's the only one ever. What? I don't know. I don't remember. But that's kind of what we use as the biological definition. So what at its core must happen with a speciation event? It must disallow them from doing what? What? Yeah, must disallow reproduction. What are some examples, do you think? What's a main one, do you think? What could happen? What external thing could happen that causes them to not be able to breed anymore? Contraception. No, that's a funny joke, though, Kesslin. What else? Not what else, but what was an actual one? Hunter, I wish you'd pay attention because you could probably have an answer to this if you would listen. No, not the individuals. Think of what could cause the entire population to stop being able to breed as a group. Well, extinction would definitely do it. Okay, but one of them is this idea of geographic separation. So, for instance, if you know that Earth's surface is always changing, mountain range, this will happen over the time of thousands or certainly hundreds and possibly hundreds of thousands of years. A mountain range could divide the species. So where its range was like this, now a mountain range has come in between. And this population A is separated from this population B, and eventually these one's offspring change enough due to the adaptations they have for these different environments, or just genetic randomness, that A and B can no longer breed if they do get introduced to each other. That's a common cause of speciation. Geographic barriers. Trying to think of another one. Well, your book only mentions that one, so I suppose that's good enough for now. Do you have questions about the speciation? Another one that does happen is change in food supply. So, for instance, specialization. If some of them start preferring to eat, I don't know, for instance, mangoes, and the other ones prefer to eat insects, then that could cause a speciation event. Their individual habits, if that happens over a long period of time, can cause two different species. Kind of like the classic example of that is the finches on the Galapagos that Darwin described, where different finches had different roles. Even though they were all started out as the same kind of finch, different ones adapted to be able to eat insects better, or nuts better, or seeds better, and by doing that, they became different species, which whole different beak shapes. Yes? Yeah, I guess we could just put mutation, but generally the mutation is kind of effectively gets washed out because it can still interbreed with all the other ones. It takes something external to cause these two to not be able to breed anymore. So maybe A starts eating mangoes, B starts eating insects, for instance. Okay, Let's talk about next. So does anyone have a question about speciation before we move on? Speciation at its core is how different species can develop from the same common ancestor. Over time, the fact that there are different kinds of species tells us this has happened repeatedly. Okay, questions? Will.
So, what was the huge wolf called?
The huge wolf?
Yeah,
These are lemurs. I can't. You can probably tell from my excellent drawings.
Like, in the past, there was a huge.
Oh, dire wolf?
Yeah.
The dire wolf. Yeah, there was just a larger wolf. In fact, there's a lot of research into this idea that megafauna, like larger versions of the animals we have today, exist during ice ages because they're better at maintaining their body temperature. And so in the ice age of this area, there would have been giant sloths and giant wolves and giant moose called monoceros and giant, what was the other one? Bears, cave bears.
Moose are still giant.
Moose are still fairly large, yeah, but they're not as big as monoceros. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is extinction. You know what extinction is, Ari. We talked about this before. What's extinction?
When a whole population.
Yeah, not just the whole population, but all of a species. All of a species dies off. Let's name some things that could cause this.
Destruction of habitat.
Okay, habitat loss. Good one. Let's have another one. Not. Yes, Will.
Volcanic eruption.
So natural disaster.
I'm going to call that climate change because generally an individual natural disaster cannot kill all of a species. Not usually. And when it can, it's because the whole climate that they live in has changed and it makes it unhospitable for them. Haley.
Too many predators are eating.
Predation. Yep. If the predators are overloaded and they eat all of a species, that could cause it. Yes? Well, predation. That's human beings doing that. It's called hunting. What else? I'm going to write two others. Yes? Okay, food loss by a specific way. I mean, we have climate change as food loss, habitat loss as food loss. What other way thing can cause them to lose their food? Okay, which would count as? Competition. That's what I'm looking for. Competition. So maybe humans are competing for their land and the resources on it, or maybe just some other organism. Maybe there's for instance, you know that Australia, because it has been separated from the other continents for so long geologically, a lot of the mammals, and they're not very good or not as good in their niche as some other placental mammals. Like for instance, there's Tasmanian devils. One of the main reasons that Tasmanian devils are going extinct is because placental mammals like dogs and cats have been introduced to that island, and they are better at predation. They're better at eating the things that Tasmanian devils eat because they're more efficient at it. And to the Tasmanian devil, it didn't evolve with them around, and so the competition is driving them extinct. And then another one that's almost entirely human-based. Yes?
Well, I was going to say natural disaster.
That we already included that in climate change. I'm just going to put pollution here, which we could include in habitat loss even, or we could probably include in climate change, but here as well. And let's just mark which ones of these could be caused by human beings. Could human beings cause habitat loss? Could human beings cause habitat loss? Yes. Could human beings cause climate change? Yeah, the evidence suggests we do. Does predation? Yes. Competition? Yes. Pollution? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you see the link? We'll leave that there. No, not. These are not all always caused by humans, but all of them can be caused by humans. Okay. One last thing. What's a mass extinction? Not everything. Not everything. If everything went extinct, we wouldn't be here. There'd be no life at all. But when
Multiple species.
yeah, many species go extinct in a short period of time. Questions about extinction and its causes? Yep, after an extinction event, because there are open niches, because the organisms that were filling those niches go extinct, biodiversity does increase after an extinction event because new things evolve to fill the niches. Other questions? Great question, Hunter.